Welcome to the Why on Earth Community Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron William Perry, and today we're visiting with the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, Martin Rohner. Martin, hello, it's great to see you today.
Yeah, hi Aaron. Great to be with you today as well.
I'm really looking forward to our discussion, in particular as the global network of financial institutions you're working with present one of the keys for the systems change making that so many of us are working toward and helping to scale worldwide.
Yeah, I think the network that I represent, or we call it actually really more a movement rather than a network. These are all financial institutions that work together to change finance, but also to finance change. These are banks that were created out of some necessity and eventually evolved into what we call values-based banks. Banks with a very clear mission. They're not in it primarily for the business, but really more because they want to have an impact in this world. So
Fabulous.
hopefully they can make a contribution.
Oh, fabulous. Yeah, looking forward to talking about this. Martin Rohner is the executive director of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, a movement of 70 plus banks that put finance at the service of people and planet. Before joining the GABV, Martin was CEO of Alternative Bank Schweiz in Switzerland, the leading sustainable and values-based bank in Switzerland and a founding member of the GABV. His earlier career in development finance and sustainable trade included stations at the Swiss State Secretariat for Economic Affairs, the World Bank, and the Inter-American Development Bank, as well as Fair Trade International. Martin holds a master's in environment and development from the University of Cambridge in the UK, a master's in business administration from the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland, and diploma of advanced studies in executive banking from the University of Bern, also in Switzerland. So Martin, welcome. It's such a joy to have this opportunity to visit with you, and I was hoping you could kick things off here by explaining for us what is values-based banking and how is that different from conventional banking?
Yeah, so values-based banking, it goes pretty much back to the roots, actually. It's about really making a difference to people and planet. It seems like pretty obvious that that should be the role of banking, but unfortunately today it isn't anymore. Many financial institutions are primarily serving their shareholders. They're in it for the business, for making more and more profits, rather than really for the social or possibly even environmental needs that we have today in the world. And we really want to bring that back to those basics. So many of our members, some of them are actually quite old, others are relatively new. But what really unites them is a very strong focus on a social or an environmental mission. They're very intentional about what they do and also what they don't do. They're grounded in the real economy. They want to serve the real economy. So, entrepreneurs, they want to serve people that want to buy their first home. These kind of activities, they're not the kind of banks that are primarily operating in the capital markets, moving money from here to there. What these banks also, what's also particular about these banks, they're very inclusive, they're very transparent. They want to be accountable, they're ambitious in their goals, and they don't only want to finance change, but they also want to change finance. So very often they engage with policymakers, regulators, mainstream banks, because they believe that banking can be different.
Wonderful. And what's the scale at this point worldwide? Is it a niche? How do you see it in the context of the global economy?
Well, of course, it's a niche in the context of the global economy, but on the other hand, I think we are quite proud. We exist now for 16 years. There's 75 member banks in 45 countries worldwide. And all of these banks together, they represent about 265 billion US dollars in total assets. More importantly, they serve about 50 million clients. And if you add their families to that, so you can get a bit of an idea of what the scale is of the values-based banking movement. While we are still small, of course, in the larger scheme of things, I believe we are large enough that we are credible, that we have made a statement that banking can be different. These are all regulated deposit-taking banks, just as you see them anywhere at the corner of your street, where you can deposit your money, you can get a loan, whether this is for your home or for your business. These are banks that are just looking differently at finance. And we try to leverage that credibility that we've built up really to change the larger financial system.
And how do you advocate across the financial sector? It looks like we may have lost your video there.
Yeah, that's
No
sorry
problem.
about that. I'm
No
back.
problem at all. It's the real world here. How do you advocate across the financial sector, and what sort of lever points, change points are you seeing in the broader financial ecosystem?
Yeah. So first of all, we're obviously having an impact through the direct work of our member banks, whether that is helping people that previous or communities that previously were underserved get access to loans, to money, to start their business and to build a livelihood. Or whether this is maybe by financing renewable energy in order to save the climate. So this can take very different shapes and forms. Beyond the GABV, we try to be a role model. We try to highlight what the strengths of banking can be for people and planet, but also where the risks are if you don't do it the right way and where the pitfalls are. I think by doing that, regulators and policymakers get a sense of what they should look for when they issue new regulation on the one hand side. What we're also seeing increasingly is that there's this whole notion of sustainable finance and ESG. The reality is that a lot of this has been focusing primarily on financial risks and not really on social and environmental impact. And some of the mainstream banks are even slowly seeing through this and are looking for alternatives. And I'm very encouraged to see that just more recently, we've been approached by several mainstream banks that are seeking advice, that want to better understand what is values-based banking, what you have to watch out for, how can you design your business model in a different way so you can have more impact and ultimately even be financially more resilient. So I'm very encouraged by these developments.
That's so exciting. And speaking of resilience, what do your member banks tend to look like in terms of profitability, sustainability from a financial and business perspective relative to the mainstream?
So look, this is it's a very good question. I would first of all, I think there's differences across our movement, but what we do consistently see is that while returns might be slightly lower than in the mainstream financial banks, they are over time and especially during crisis stable. So
Mm-hmm.
we've been carrying out an analysis, a report. We did this the first 10 years of our existence. We at some point we stopped doing it, but we were able to show empirically that when there's an economic downturn, when there's a crisis, our member banks just continue on and continue having stable results. They've got a strong relationship with their clients. They're not engaged in speculative business models. We've seen this, for example, we were launched right after the financial crisis in 2008, and we had a look back then how our members, because many of them were already around even before the GABV was created, how they had performed, and it was very clear that they were continuing to serve their clients. They were not disengaging, like what we've seen with many of the mainstream financial institutions. So I think overall, our members, they are profitable, they are stable. Most importantly, they prioritize long-term financial resilience over short-term profits. Having said that, I like to say that our members are profitable because they are values-based, not despite they are values-based. And what do I mean by that? What we see in our member banks is that because of their business model that is very much centered around the communities and the needs of the clients, the customer loyalty is very high. I'll give you an example that I personally experienced in the bank that I was running in Switzerland, Alternative Bank Switzerland. We were the first bank to introduce negative interest rates. There's a story behind that. Switzerland had the lowest interest rates in the world, and we felt at the time that it's not fair for the people with less money to be charged a very high service fee. And so we decided to keep a low service fee, but instead introduce negative interest rates. All the other banks were introducing simply a very high service fee. What seems almost an impossible move as a banker actually turned out that many of the clients of ours congratulated us to that move, and we gained a lot of new clients because they completely understood that this, at that moment, was a fairer way for them to deposit money. If they had little money, they were paying little. If they had a lot of money, they were paying more. So I think that's just a very good example to be very concrete about how values-based and a values-based business model in banking can really enhance customer loyalty, and so therefore in the longer run lead to better risk profiles, lead to a better asset and liability structure, etc., etc.
It's so interesting. You know, I'm struck by this set of attributes around stability, especially amid perturbations, and that is there's such a strong correlation or analogy between that approach in the financial markets and also that approach to systemic risks we see in the realms of ecology and society at large, right? And this focus on stability, you know, as opposed to casino style risk taking and derivatives upon derivatives upon derivatives in the secondary and tertiary financial markets. It's I think one of the things that we as a global society probably could come to understand better, and also come to make our banking decisions as a result of that understanding in a different way. And it's fascinating to me to think in terms of, you know, from risk adjusted returns, quote unquote, to reality adjusted returns in this situation in which we're facing so much systemic risk across sectors.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think what I would really urge all of your listeners or anyone I meet is really to think about what is it that your money actually does in the bank? It doesn't stop in the bank. It doesn't sleep in the bank. Your money goes somewhere, and it makes a big difference whether that money goes, let's say, to funding fossil fuels or funding weapons and arms, or whether that money goes to supporting small-scale farmers or women in Latin America having better access to finance. So there's lots of ways of using your money, or at least the money that you're actually not using right away, but that you're saving by you can place that money in a bank that thinks about these issues and responds to the needs of the communities that they're operating in. Um, by the way, that's also one of the reasons why several of our member banks at the Global Alliance for Banking on Values are highly transparent. There's some banks that publish every single loan they make so that depositors or shareholders can see exactly where the money goes. I mean, I think that takes it to quite an extreme, but I think it overall speaks to the kind of accountability that our member banks show. They want to really show what they're doing with the money because they feel that's also a way of engaging the wider community and creating a relationship of solidarity between those that have money and those that need money to, let's say, start a business or use it in any other productive way.
So wonderful to hear about all of this. Could you for our audience give a few examples of the banks that are in the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, and give us a sense for the geographic reach and range of the movement?
Yeah. So the beauty of the Global Alliance, I think, lies in its diversity. And I said this before, in the meantime, we have 75 member banks, and really all the way from Canada to Papua New Guinea and all the way from Bolivia to Central Asia. These are retail banks, they're credit unions, they're mutual banks, they're commercial banks, they're microfinance banks. So very different business models, all united by what we actually call the GABV principles, which is a focus on social and environmental impact, being grounded in the communities they serve, really with strong focus on the real economy, financially resilient, a very inclusive and transparent governance, and ultimately a very different attitude and culture. All of those principles are really embedded in the culture of these banks. Now, obviously, values are very contextual. So what is positive impact will mean something very different, let's say, in a country like Bangladesh than it means in the United States. To take the example of Bangladesh, where one of our founding members is based, BRAC Bank. So the history goes back to the War of Independence in Bangladesh, and then in 1972, a gentleman called Sir Faisal Abed founded BRAC, an NGO that initially was focused on emergency relief and eventually went into microfinance. And they were so successful that over time, they realized that their microfinance entrepreneurs needed a bank to serve them because they became small and medium-sized enterprises, but there was no bank in Bangladesh that could serve that purpose. So in 2001, they founded BRAC Bank, and BRAC went on doing its business, including people. Together, BRAC and BRAC Bank have lifted millions of people out of poverty in Bangladesh. But not only that, today BRAC Bank is actually the largest bank in Bangladesh. Part of the reason, again, because it is a values-based bank. I don't know if you are aware, but in 2024, there was a revolution in Bangladesh. There was a regime change. A lot of the banks a lot of the mainstream banks were very closely associated with the former regime. And so there was a flight to safety. And where do people put their money? In the most trustworthy bank. That was Bragg Bank. So today it's the largest bank. That's just one example. Now, maybe more looking at the United States, I think we have some wonderful examples there. One of my, uh, I wouldn't call them favorite banks, but certainly one of the most inspiring banks for me is Southern Bancorp. They're based in Arkansas. They were founded in 1986 with they were there was a group of people that was very concerned with the economic decline in the rural areas of Arkansas, and they saw a need to create a bank that was going to serve those communities. And so they founded Southern Bancorp. They had a $10 million initial investment. Now, in the meantime, Southern Bancorp is operating throughout Arkansas. They're a 3 billion total asset bank, and they're growing very rapidly. They're one of the remaining banks in Arkansas. Most of the mainstream banks are pulling out of that region, and they are the ones that are holding the fort and keeping economic development going on. So I think that's also a wonderful story. There's lots of other examples, and I'll probably touch upon them as we go along in our conversation.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Have to give a shout out to our mutual friend and colleague Ken LaRoe, who's been on the podcast, who is the founder and chairman of Climate First Bank, one of your member banks.
Yeah, well, thanks for the cue. Actually, I just came back from our regional chapter meeting hosted by Climate First Bank. It was a fantastic meeting. But what really got me really wired when I heard about what Climate First Bank is doing. They're a startup bank, a challenger bank, now 4 years old in the meantime, so still quite young. Within 3 years, they've managed to put solar on 80,000 roofs. Um, an amazing feat. I think they have a fantastic digital business model where they are really making a huge difference. And I think, and really also helping homeowners get more independent from the grid and contributing to mitigating climate change. Again, a wonderful story from our membership.
Absolutely. Yeah, really, really wonderful. I was hoping you might also tell us about the bank in the movement that is part of the Mondragon ecosystem, Labora Kucha, and also the Centenary Bank in Uganda. I was hoping you would share a bit about each of those with our audience as well.
So, yeah, well, Mondragon, for those that are not familiar, it's actually the world's largest cooperative movement. It's a whole corporation, but based on cooperative. It was started by a priest in the Basque region of Spain during the Franco era in the 1950s. It was a very challenging time where that region was very poor and excluded. And this priest just started with this idea of financial empowerment, and then eventually out of this movement developed this cooperative structure with different industrial businesses, but also a very strong and large bank that is focused really on supporting the entrepreneurs in that group. They are in the Mondragon region. It's a whole region in the Basque area. They're really very closely connected, and they have, of course, an impact way beyond Mondragon in terms of the economic development of that region. So, a very interesting example with a very special history as well. As for Centenary Bank, also very interesting bank. This is Centenary started in, I think, about around 1993 in Uganda by the Catholic Church, really to help fight poverty and find solutions to include people in the economic development. In the meantime, again, they are actually the largest bank in terms of number of clients in Uganda and the second largest in terms of total assets. What's very interesting about their business model, they operate a network of 8,000 agents across the country, which are not just serving their own clients, but actually the clients of other banks. They have set themselves the goal to really reach the furthest corners of the country, and I think that's very important in a country like Uganda.
Fabulous. Well, I want to mention right now, because it's a good opportunity to do so, that our new book, Our Biggest Deal, has case study vignettes on some 33 notable companies and organizations, including the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, including the Mondragon Cooperative System, including Climate First Bank and Amalgamated Bank, another US-based member. And additionally, there are essays in here from 28 contributing authors, many of whom are executives, organizational leaders, folks working in the mission-driven business and finance sector, as well as the community development and resilience sectors. And so want to make sure folks know about this resource. You can get more information and get copies at whyonearth.org/ourbiggestdeal. And want to also make sure folks know that they can get to the Global Alliance for Banking on Values at GABV.org. And we will include these links in the show notes. In addition to the website for GABV are several social media links that will provide you. This is on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Banking on Values is Facebook, Instagram, and at Banking on Values YouTube. For LinkedIn, the handle is a bit longer. I won't spell it out for you, but you can find it in the show notes if you'd like. And I want to be sure to take this opportunity to thank several of our sponsors and partners who have not only supported the book project, Our Biggest Deal, but also help to underwrite and support our Why on Earth community podcast series. This includes Bluestone Life Insurance and Co Hospitality, the Brad and Lindsay Lidge Family Foundation, Clean Content, Climate First Bank, Dobrosfera Kind Media, Earth Coast Productions, Gaia.ai, Goodstead Financial, Launch Legal, Patagonia's Home Planet Fund, Hush Blackwell, Regenerative World Quest, the Riverside at Boulder. By the way, they're running a special 20% discount for anybody in the Y on Earth community audience and ecosystem for events, weddings, retreats, gatherings. Be sure to mention Y on Earth if you're looking to host an event at the Riverside in Boulder, Colorado. Shea Skiff Communications, Soundlight Foundation, Verona Rylander Philanthropies, and Waylay Waters Hemp-Infused Aromatherapy Soaking Salts. Of course, a very special thank you to our ambassadors, our growing global network of ambassadors, and our monthly supporters. If you're not a monthly supporter and you'd like to become one, you can join at any level. If you join at the $33 level, we're happy to send you jars of the Waylay Water Soaking Salts as a thank you gift. That's available in the United States and Canada presently. So many thanks to everybody. whyonearth.org will get you to these companies, to the books and resources, to more information about our ambassador network. And of course, I just want to remind everybody that this is the Why on Earth Community Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron William Perry, and today we're visiting with Martin Rohner, the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, a movement I hope that more and more and more, and eventually most of us worldwide are well familiar with and supporting and participating with one way or another. And Martin, on that note, I want to ask, how does a bank go about joining? And I've heard you mention credit unions. Of course, there are a whole bunch of those. How might a bank go about it, and why would their leadership um, be compelled to join? Sort of beyond
Yeah.
the obvious.
Yeah. Well, I think really there's different reasons to join the GABV. I think first of all, and most importantly, I think it's a kinship um, between these banks, between the leaders in these banks, and the opportunity to share knowledge, to exchange, to collaborate. And finally, also knowing that together we have more voice and visibility if we want to, spread the message about values-based banking. So I think that's what's driving these banks towards our movement. In the Global South, for example, the Global Alliance for Banking and Values, or membership in the Global Alliance for Banking and Values, is increasingly being recognized by the so-called development finance institutions. These are financial organizations typically run by or financed by governments, the United States, Germany, France, and others, the Netherlands. And these DFIs, development finance institutions, they recognize that banks that are part of our movement already meet certain what they would consider quality and impact criteria that they're looking for. So for members in the Global South, can be sometimes the attraction. But I think for really everyone, it's that notion of belonging to a larger movement, of being able to learn more. So just speaking to that, maybe in my case, for example, when I was CEO at Alternative Bank Switzerland, um, I had some strategic challenges around capital, around profitability. And the solutions, I really found them through the Global Alliance. And I think that is the typical way how we operate. It's by building relationships, first and foremost, between the CEOs. But then we also work with the experts in the member banks, the heads of sustainability, the heads of human development, the marketing officers. And we also work with the non-executive directors because the values, they really start at the very top. The shareholders and the boards play a crucial role in values-based banking. So we also have programs for the non-executive directors. We have a values-based governance academy, which is a great way of bringing non-executive directors to better understand what it means to be a board member in a values-based organization. So that's why banks might join the Global Alliance. Now, how do they join? We have quite a rigorous membership assessment process using what we call the GABV scorecard. And the scorecard, well, apart from basic requirements to join, you have to be a regulated, deposit-taking financial institution with a values-based mission, and your CEO has to be committed to really engage with the network. So that's kind of the basic requirements. But then the scorecard looks at what we call quantitative factors. We look at financial resilience. We look at real economy focus. How many of your assets are invested in the real economy? How much of your revenue is coming from the real economy? And we look, most importantly, also at what we call the triple line exposure of your assets. So how much goes towards people, planet, and prosperity? What's the share of your assets that are really making a difference in your business? So that's what we call the quantitative factors. But then there's also qualitative elements against which those quantitative factors get calibrated. And the qualitative elements look at things like what's your governance look like, the diversity on your board, your human resource policies, the general thrust of your strategy, what kind of products and services do you offer, et cetera, et cetera. So that kind of refines the picture and gives us a better understanding also around the philosophy behind the business model, the culture that is being practiced. And to be honest, we don't want to be an exclusive club. I know that the hurdles are strict. There's also the possibility to join as an associate member, but what we want to see is progress. We want to see how banks evolve. And the idea behind the scorecard is less to have a score, but really more to have a deeper understanding of the strengths and maybe also the weaknesses, the areas where you can still improve. And then we engage with those members and help them on the way, on the journey towards values-based banking.
Wow. Yeah, so interesting. I have to ask, I've been impressed by the certification rubrics of organizations like B Lab that does the B certified benefits company certification. Of course, 1% for the Planet has a wonderful ecosystem of companies across many sectors contributing top line money toward NGOs worldwide working on climate, ecology, and social issues. Is there much in the way of interaction and intersection with some of those other uh,
Mhm.
membership networks and movements and
Yeah.
certifying bodies?
Yeah. So, well, maybe first to answer your question, yes, of course, we do have relationships. We often meet at conferences. We're asked
Yeah.
to speak on the same panels, or we also, when B Lab designed their scorecard for specifically for the financial institutions, they had a look at what we do, and when we designed our scorecard, we had a look also how B Lab goes about this. I just want to be very clear. I think the big difference between B Lab and the GABV, B Lab is a certification system. It's a consumer-facing label, so it's a bit different. We're not a certification system. We have a verification approach because we're a membership network. We don't have the intention of being a consumer-facing label. Of course, consumers can find our member banks. We want to primarily be visible within the financial industry among the peers, and that's where we're building our recognition rate because we believe that's the levers that we have to change really the way finance works.
Yeah, so interesting and so exciting. And I'm wondering, how did this all this come to be? What's the history and genesis of GABV?
Well, like with everything, it's people. So there was a group of founders, and starting with Peter Blom, who was the CEO of Triodos Bank in the Netherlands, but also a couple of others, including Mary Houghton. She was the co-founder of Shore Bank in Chicago. Thomas Jorberg from GLS Bank in Germany. Sir Faiz Labet, who I mentioned previously, the founder of Brack and Brack Bank, and Luis Felipe Dertiano, who was the CEO of Mi Banco at the time, one of the leading microfinance banks in Latin America. And they got together because they realized there's so many great, sustainable, and impactful financial institutions around the world, but they're not really connected. And they realized that these institutions could be a lot stronger, could be more visible, and could learn from each other if there was some way of collaborating and bringing them together. And that brought them to the point to create the GABV. And Coincidentally, while this started already long before these reflections started long before the financial crisis, just as they were going to launch, the financial crisis hit, and so it became even more evident that such an institution, such a movement was necessary, and that's how it all started. With about 10 initial banks from all over the world. It was very clear at the beginning that this should be a global effort. It shouldn't be a Eurocentric or a North American centric institution, but it should be a truly global effort. And I'm very proud to say that we're like I said before, not only are we global, but we're pretty much evenly distributed between banks in the global north and the global south, and we have very different business models. So that makes this movement very unique in the financial sector.
Yeah, tremendous, tremendous. Well, I know that it's probably implicit and perhaps even to some degree obvious to our audience the theory of change at work with GABV, but would you mind just encapsulating and articulating that for us so we can put a fine point on it?
Well, so every one of our members, of course, has a different theory of change. But I think in essence, what we're saying is if you design the upstream business model in the right way, if you set the right incentives, if you set the right values, if you've got a coherent business model, if you're clear about what you want to achieve and what you don't want to do, or what you don't want to finance in the case of a bank, then what will come out at the other end will be the right thing. And it goes back also to this idea that I mentioned before that when you walk into a values-based bank, you'll feel a very different culture. People won't be trying to sell it. They're not going to sell you services that you don't need or products you don't need, but rather they will sit down with you and really listen. What are your needs and what can they do for you, and how can you really come together as partners at eye level and resolve that very specific need. And I think that is in a way a key to ensuring that at the end, really, whatever the circumstances, you have a positive impact and you're making always the best out of it. So I'm saying this also a little bit because there's so much effort around impact measurement.
Mm,
But the point with impact measurement is if you're not clear what your the values are that you want to measure against, well,
mm,
then impact measurement is futile.
mm,
It doesn't make any sense. So rather than spending so much energy on measuring impact, which can be in some instances very important, we want to focus on designing the business model the right way with the right checks and balances in place so that at the end the right thing comes out.
mm, mm, mm. Wonderful. One of the things you and I recently talked about prior to our discussion today is the environmental and climate performance of your member banks, and in addition to the long-term financial resilience that your community-centered and mission-driven member banks demonstrate, there's also a notable increased positive impact when it comes to things like climate action. Can you speak to that a bit and perhaps share the uh, studies coming out of Topo Finance that you recently referenced for me?
Yeah. Yeah, so Topo Finance is an institution that is looking at the emissions profile of different financial institutions. And actually, I can only recommend to your listeners to maybe go on their website and use their emissions calculator. But what's interesting about their findings is that typically a mainstream bank will produce 5 times more greenhouse gas emissions than a values-based bank or a green bank.
Mm,
So I think if you then think that through, okay, that sounds interesting, and maybe privately I can, or as a private person, I can take my money and put it in a green bank. But if you're thinking larger scale and you're aware that some of the largest corporations in the world, they have billions of dollars sitting in their bank accounts, then you realize the size of the change that you can achieve if you move that money to the right kind of financial institutions.
Hmm.
So I think that's I think quite an eye opener, and I think Topo Finance has really put their finger on a very important issue there. More generally, in terms of our own members, our members, many of our members have already in 2019 at the occasion of our 10th anniversary signed what we call the GABV Climate Change Commitment, and under that commitment, they have agreed to measure their and publish their greenhouse gas emissions, not just in operations, but actually in terms of the loans and investments that they make, which is the bigger part and the more relevant part. And also to reduce those greenhouse gas emissions along the reduction paths proposed by the Paris Climate Agreement. So I think there's that commitment. And also in terms of climate, I think the GABV presents, it's a very nice story around how we can have an impact far beyond our membership. So around the same time, this program called the Partnership for Carbon Accounting Financials was initiated with the idea of creating a standard methodology for the financial industry to measure exactly those greenhouse gas emissions. There was no sense that every bank had to develop their own methodology.
Yeah.
And so this was launched in the Netherlands, and through the GABV efforts and the GABV members, we were able to help globalize that program. And today, over 640 financial institutions accounting for about $1 trillion in total assets are using that methodology to measure their greenhouse gas emissions and to report quite often actually to the regulators and to the general public about what they're doing in terms of climate mitigation. So I think that's a very nice story how the GABV has had an impact far beyond its membership.
That is so tremendous. It's got me thinking about some of the projections we've got regarding total global carbon and other GHG greenhouse gas loading in the atmosphere, projections and trajectories. We've got the drawdown frameworks. We've got the incredible new super data rich resources coming out of the One Earth organization with our friend Justin Winters. And I'm just curious, are you aware of anybody mapping into the future the climate situation with the key variable being, percentage of capital migration into GABV banks and sort of secondarily expansion of GABV the banking network and movement? Is that information that we have available at this point?
I wish I did. I
Yeah.
don't have it.
Okay.
But I think any institutional investor that is interested in putting their money in a place where it has less greenhouse gas emissions should certainly look at banks like the banks that are in the Global Alliance for Banking on Values.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are other very good green banks that are not part of our movement and that
Mm.
I hope will eventually become part of our movement. But it's the GABV is certainly a good place to start.
Yeah, I mean a 5x differential is not insignificant, right? That is a substantial delta
Yeah.
there.
I mean, look, this is the way I look at it. It's a substantial delta, but that can change. It's all dynamic because mainstream banks might eventually become more like us, and that will
Mhm.
be my biggest hope.
Yeah.
And we stand ready and are prepared to support those banks if that's truly their
Mhm.
intention. It's not an
Yeah.
easy journey for them because, of course, there are entrenched interests, but we are here to support.
Yeah, fabulous. Well, I have to ask, notwithstanding the tremendous systemic risks that you and so many other leaders are dealing with worldwide, when you look out 5, 10 years from now, what are you most excited or hopeful about? What are you seeing that gives you a sense of optimism in the midst of so many challenges?
Yeah. Well, well, first of all, what gives me the biggest and left me, I think it has to do with my my computer, which is getting a bit old.
Yeah, yeah, it was quite a cliffhanger. The suspense is perfect.
I'm still here. No, but what gives me a lot of optimism is when I hear how people respond to the value proposition of values-based banks. Wherever our members go, they get positive resonance, and people obviously are hungry for these kind of organizations. And I'm sure it's the same for businesses as well. But in the financial sector, I think the GABV is certainly a driving force there. Now, what I'm hoping. I've been in my career. You mentioned it previously. I was working in development finance. I was working at the World Bank, and we were just at the time moving from we were just developing at the time that the United Nations was developing the Sustainable Development Goals.
Mhm.
And a lot of what was encapsulated in the Sustainable Development Goals was created by the front runners and then eventually picked up. And today, the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, almost have become mainstream. And
Mhm.
I feel that values-based banking is kind of a missing piece. And so my hope is that in 10 years from now, when the next sustainable edition of the Sustainable Development Goals comes out, that the obvious standard for finance is going to be values-based finance. It's going to be finance that does the right thing for people and planet. That will be my highest hopes for 10 years from now.
Yeah, fabulous. Well, I look forward to that happening, and may it be so. And notwithstanding the fact that GABV primarily focuses on the professionals and institutions in the financial sector, when it comes to the general public, and some of our audience are finance professionals, but many are not. There's a lot we can be doing, right, as consumers, as folks making banking decisions, and I'm wondering. What is your recommended call to action for people across all sectors and in communities anywhere and everywhere when it comes to this particular issue?
Yeah. Find out where your money goes. That's it. Now you can be a bit more advocate than critical, and you can go to your bank and ask your client advisor questions and find out like that. If you don't have the time to do that, then just come to our website and have a look where the closest GABV member bank is. I'm sure there are other very good websites that can direct you towards banks that are doing the right thing. It doesn't have to be just the Global Alliance. But just be aware that it makes a huge difference where you put your money and in what kind of financial institutions, what kind of financial institution you bank with.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, Martin, thank you so much. I want to remind our audience they can go to gabv.org to get more information about the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. And of course, we're about to wrap up our podcast discussion, but you and I, have another 5, 10 minute chat behind the scenes, quote unquote, for our Ambassador Network. And I want to just invite folks in our audience, if you're not yet part of our Ambassador Network and you'd like to join and get access to some of those additional resources and tools, go ahead to whyonearth.org and click on the Become an Ambassador page and start your journey there. Before we wrap, Martin, I want to thank you for taking the time visiting with me today, and want to also invite you, if there's anything else you'd like to share with our audience, please, my friend, the floor is yours.
Well, I am just very inspired by the work you do, Aaron. I'm very happy that our biggest deal is out now, and I hope you're going to get a lot of resonance. I think ultimately it's not just the politicians or the consumers or the banks that need to change the world. Everyone needs to change. It's a whole ecosystem. And I think the kind of work that you guys are doing is very important. And I'm really grateful to all the listeners also on this podcast. And hopefully, I'm sure many of them are already kicking into action, and hopefully more will do going forward. So thanks for having me on your podcast.
Wonderful. Thank you, Martin.
The Why on Earth Community Stewardship and Sustainability podcast series is hosted by Aaron William Perry, author, thought leader, and executive consultant. The podcast and video recordings are made possible by the generous support of people like you. To sign up as a daily, weekly, or monthly supporter, please visit whyonearth.org/support. Support packages start at just $1 per month. The podcast series is also sponsored by several corporate and organization sponsors. You can get discounts on their products and services using the code WHYONEARTH, all one word with a Y. These sponsors are listed on the whyonearth.org/support page. If you found this particular podcast episode especially insightful, informative, or inspiring, please pass it on and share it with a friend whom you think will also enjoy it. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for your support. And thank you for being a part of the Why on Earth community.